There are nights in Michigan when even the bravest hearts tremble. When a lonely road, an abandoned house, and the howl of the wind hold secrets that could break a lifetime. What does it mean to keep searching when the world has already turned its back? As Officer Sam Wilder and his faithful dog Alder race through darkness and loss, a single desperate cry for help shatters their silence, leading to a discovery that will test the limits of courage, compassion, and what it truly means to come home. Would you keep searching for hope, even when everyone else has given up? Tell us your story below. The wind off Lake Superior had a way of lingering in the bones, long after the sun slipped behind the pine ridges and the world surrendered to gray. On the last night of October, Ishpeming seemed to fold into itself, a town waiting beneath the hush of yellow leaves and the faint hush of approaching winter. The houses, modest, wooden, many built by hands now gone, sat shoulder to shoulder, their windows blinking out one by one until only the porch lights remained, halos of weak gold pushing back the dark. Officer Samuel Wilder was not a man who rushed through nights like these. He drove the old patrol Tahoe slow, headlights drifting along the winding back road that cut through the silent outskirts. Next to him, in the passenger seat, Alder sat upright, 9 years old, his coat thick as winter moss, ears turned to the smallest rustle in the underbrush. A scar, half hidden beneath gray-black fur along his spine, rose and fell with each quiet breath. Sam's hand rested on the wheel, fingers heavy, knuckles thickened from years of work, a life lived mostly with his back to the warmth of others. Out here, on the edge of town, it was just him and the dog, the silence and whatever unease the night decided to bring. He let the radio chatter fade to a whisper, crackling somewhere behind the drone of the engine, its voices far away and irrelevant. Most nights were like this now. Nothing but empty roads and time that seemed to spool out, unbroken. Tonight was not meant to be different. Still, the air felt loaded. Something restless pressed behind the quiet. Something that reminded him of old dreams, the ones that left him waking with the sheets twisted around his legs, breathing hard, half lost in memory. The file folder on the seat behind him was thin but weighted. June Callahan, missing 3 days, last seen leaving the art classroom at the end of her after-school session. Single. No close family left. Friends described her as gentle, easily startled, a woman who collected stray cats and wildflowers pressed in battered notebooks. Sam had spoken to her once, long ago, about a lost wallet she thought she'd left at the park. He remembered how she'd barely met his eyes, voice no louder than the hush of pine needles underfoot. Alder shifted in his seat, nose pressed to the glass. The patrol car passed the edge of town, where the old roads narrowed and the woods thickened. There were fewer houses here, only the broken fence lines and distant silhouettes of barns hunched against the night. Sam slowed, rolling down his window a crack. Cold air seeped in, carrying the smell of wet leaves, old smoke, and something sharper. Rust, maybe, or the memory of metal. He glanced at Alder. The dog's body had grown tense, eyes focused on a stretch of darkness ahead. Sam tapped the brake, gaze tracing the familiar landscape. His mind moved in slow circles. June, the missing girl, the empty house her landlord had checked, the neighbor who thought she heard a scream, but couldn't be sure. He'd spent a lifetime learning to read the spaces between stories, the things that went unsaid, the shapes left behind by grief. Some nights, it felt as if he'd never stop searching for the ones who simply vanished. Alder's growl was low, a sound so soft it barely trembled the air, but Sam felt it in his chest. He reached over, fingers brushing the dog's ruff, reassurance for both of them. The world outside the windshield had gone still, every shadow pulled taut. At the corner of his eye, movement, a flicker, no more than a thread of silver from a flashlight, dancing along the far end of an overgrown lane. There, tucked against the tree line, a house sagged beneath the weight of its own neglect. He remembered it from years ago, a place left empty after a foreclosure, windows boarded, roof lines sinking. Nobody had lived there in nearly a decade. Alder pressed his nose harder to the glass, his breath fogging a small patch, ears up, every muscle alert. Sam let the engine idle, heart knocking slow and heavy. In the hush, he became aware of all the small sounds, a distant branch snapping, wind combing through dry grass, the sharp tap of Alder's claws against the plastic mat as the dog shifted closer to the door. There was something out there. The dog knew it. Sam could feel it in the old ache behind his ribs, in the way his hands tightened, remembering other nights, other lost girls. Always the question of who would be found, and who would be left to memory. He turned off the headlights, letting the car settle deeper into darkness. The porch light of the abandoned house blinked once, perhaps a trick of the eye, perhaps not. Beyond it, only blackness. For a long moment, neither man nor dog moved. Then Alder's tail twitched, and he let out a sound between a whine and a warning, eyes never leaving that house. Sam exhaled, a breath that seemed to empty more than just his lungs. He reached for the radio, thumb hesitating over the call button, but stopped. Some things, he knew, were better faced alone, at least at first. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the promise of frost, the kind that would settle in the fields before dawn. The world seemed to narrow to the space between two heartbeats. Alder glanced at Sam, waiting. Sam met the dog's gaze, saw there not just animal intelligence, but something deeper, a silent plea for trust, for action, for the kind of hope that grows in the darkest soil. And somewhere, on the far edge of the field, a light flickered again, then vanished. Alder let out a final, uneasy growl, his nose pressed hard against the glass. Sam's eyes caught that faint glimmer, someone's flashlight, disappearing behind the silhouette of the abandoned house. Who was out there in the dark? And what had Alder sensed that a man, for all his years, still struggled to name? The headlights died with a final shudder. For a moment, Sam and Alder sat together in the hush that follows all endings. The end of warmth, the end of familiar roads, the end of any illusion that this night would be like all the others. Across a stretch of brittle weeds and cold earth, the house hunkered down, battered by years and wind, its pale boards silvered with age. The fields around it lay empty, stubbled with the ghosts of last summer's hay. Above, a white wedge of moon hung tangled in the thin crowns of black spruce, leaking its frail light onto the yard. Sam stepped out first, boots pressing slow and careful into the tall grass. The cold was deeper here, and a kind of old-world silence draped itself over everything, thick enough to muffle even the thump of his heart. Alder moved to his side, unhurried but alert, every sense alive in the velvet dark. For all his age, the shepherd's body was taut, tail low, nose twitching at the invisible currents that curled between the fence posts and the wild tangles of goldenrod. His paws pressed soundlessly against the wet earth, the only movement in a world paused and waiting. The house itself seemed to breathe in shallow bursts. Its roof sagged like a tired shoulder, shingles missing. A single window on the upper floor broken open to the night. Steps up to the porch had rotted to splinters. Every surface bore the stains of seasons, rain, ice, wind, years of neglect. This was not the place where anyone belonged. It was the place people left behind. Sam found himself walking more slowly than usual. He felt the weight of Alder's presence, how the dog paused at his thigh, head lowered, as if to say that here, every movement counted. The two of them became figures in a painting no one would ever hang. The lonely man, the aging dog, both marked by scars invisible and not, both drawn toward the uncertain threshold of a ruin. Alder's breath steamed faintly in the cold, the only warmth in a yard given over to emptiness. Sam listened to it. In, out, in. He tried not to think of how many times he had entered places like this, always with the hope of a miracle and the fear of a body. He remembered a different house, a different winter, one where he'd found only silence and the lingering perfume of grief. The thought pressed against his ribs now, an ache without words. There was a crunch of broken glass beneath his boot. He froze, letting his eyes adjust. Alder pressed forward, his body almost touching Sam's leg. The dog's head moved in tiny increments, scanning, scenting, reading the secret life of the yard. Mouse tracks by the foundation, a fox's sharp tang, the faint metallic ghost of blood somewhere not far off. For a minute, all Sam could hear was the wind threading through dead stalks and the gentle pant of the shepherd. Every sense strained for meaning. The loneliness here was not simply an absence of people, but the presence of all that had been left unsaid. The arguments that ended in slammed doors, the laughter that never returned, the prayers that never left the ceiling. It was the loneliness that builds up like dust in the corners, that clings to skin and settles in bones. Alder veered left, body shrinking low. His nose worked the grass, finding something the human eye could not see. Sam watched, trusting the ritual, the silent conversation between dog and darkness. Alder circled a patch just before the porch, then stopped, paw raised, ears up. He nosed the ground, then looked at Sam with a pointed insistence. This, here, mattered. Sam knelt, his own breath held. The grass parted beneath his hand, and he found it. A scrap of fabric, rough, torn along one edge. He lifted it slowly, turning it in his palm. It was dark, stained. There, unmistakable, a small, rusty bloom of dried blood. He raised it to his nose and caught another scent beneath the metallic edge. Salt and fear, the dense, sour smell of a body under strain. It was fresh, or at least fresher than the house deserved. Alder sat close, eyes fixed on Sam. The dog's stillness was a kind of anchor in the shifting dark. This was what they did, after all. They listened to what others left behind, piecing together a tapestry made from shreds and echoes. Sam felt the ache of old regrets tighten in his chest. He thought of June Callahan, whose photograph was still pressed beneath the clear plastic of his badge wallet. He thought of every person who'd ever disappeared, who'd slipped out of the daylight without explanation. Here was a thread, a thin, desperate thread, that maybe, just maybe, hadn't snapped. The house loomed ahead, its windows dark. Sam stood, the piece of cloth curled in his fist. Alder leaned into him, warm and solid, a presence that made the loneliness bearable. The shepherd's eyes gleamed, steady and watchful. Sam let the silence settle a little longer, felt the weight of the moment, the aloneness of it, the strange comfort in knowing he was not alone in it. A shiver ran up Sam's spine, not from cold, but from the sense of something half-glimpsed, some unfinished story, hovering in the air like breath. Beneath the porch, the light from Sam's flashlight picked out a second, almost invisible clue. A single thread of long blonde hair, snagged on a nail, quivering in the wind. The color matched June's. But next to it, a boot print, larger than his own, pressed deep in the mud. Did this trace belong to June? Or to the one who'd brought her here? And if so, was that person still close, hidden somewhere in the breathing dark of the house? The porch groaned beneath Sam's weight, an old, wounded sound that seemed to linger in the cool air long after he had crossed its threshold. Alder padded silently at his side, his body low and tight to the ground, eyes bright and unblinking in the dusk. The house, up close, was less a building than a memory, a place abandoned but not emptied, shadows thick as velvet pressed into every crack and seam. Sam's flashlight cut a soft path across the warped floorboards, the beam catching in clouds of dust, splinters jutting like broken teeth. The air was heavy with the scent of rot and rainwater, mingled with something sharper, an edge of fear that made the hairs on Sam's arms lift. He paused just inside the doorway, letting his eyes adjust to the thin slices of moonlight leaking through the boarded windows. Even the smallest sound was magnified. Alder's soft breath, the groan of timber settling, the faint tap of a loose shutter shifting in the wind. Alder nudged forward, nose to the ground, tracing a silent map only he could read. He paused by the kitchen, sniffed, then moved on, his body following a line invisible to human sight. Sam followed, one hand loose on his belt, every nerve alive. He remembered a house like this when he was a rookie, the way time seemed to thicken in the corners, how hope itself could become a fragile, dangerous thing. They passed a toppled chair, a table still bearing the circle stains of old mugs. Sam's beam found the remains of a calendar tacked to the wall, pages curled, dates faded out by years. He didn't look for the year. Loss had no need for calendars. Alder's path led to a narrow alcove near the back, hidden behind the skeleton of a battered old stove. There, something subtle, a faint line in the dust, a pattern broken where the footprints overlapped. Sam's eyes narrowed. Alder circled, then stopped before what appeared at first glance to be just another battered cabinet. But the dog's body tensed, and he dropped his head, pawing at the floor with deliberate insistence. Sam crouched, knuckles brushing the ground. He reached out and touched the back of the cabinet, finding the old metal latch, cold beneath his skin, sticky with years of grime. He moved it aside and with effort, slid the cabinet enough to reveal a slim door, paint blistered by decades, set low into the wall. He pressed his ear against it. Somewhere below, there was a sound, so faint he almost missed it. A sigh, or a sob, or only the wind. He listened, heart slowing, willing himself to hear what others might have missed. Alder sat beside him, eyes fixed on the seam of the door, his breath measured and quiet. Sam felt a surge of gratitude for the animal's steady calm, The way Alder was always more present in these moments than any human partner he'd ever known. He drew a slow breath, steadied his hand, and pulled the door open. A wave of cold air washed up from the blackness below, carrying with it the sense of mold, earth, and the metallic tang of fear. The narrow wooden stairs creaked as Sam shifted his weight to peer down. The light from his flashlight pooled at the bottom, swallowed almost whole by the dark. He hesitated. Memories pressed in of a friend years ago, lost in a place not so different, a grief that had never quite learned how to leave. But Alder nudged him, gentle but insistent. It was enough. Sam stepped down, one slow foot at a time, Alder at his heel, the two of them descending together into the silence. The cellar was colder still, the walls slick with moisture. Cobwebs trailed from the rafters, and the smell of old earth rose up with every step. Sam's light revealed the outline of boxes, a torn rug, the spidery writing of something scrawled in charcoal on the wall. A child's name, half erased by time. The sense of someone's life lived here, long ago, clung to everything. At the far end of the cellar, Alder stopped, nose pressed to a crack in the concrete, ears pitched forward. Sam's light followed. There, a door, set low, battered but still closed. He pressed his ear to it. At first, only the echo of his own breath. Then there, a sound. A whimper, barely more than the rustle of air. But it was a sound of life, however faint. He tapped softly. Silence, then a ragged gasp, a tiny plea drifting up through the wood. Alder lay down, nose nudging the gap, tail sweeping the floor once. Sam crouched, whispering words he barely heard himself. He rattled the handle, then pressed his shoulder to the old door. It didn't budge. He looked at Alder, who watched him with perfect faith, as if the solution could be willed into being. Sam gritted his teeth, wedged his flashlight into the crook of his neck, and worked his pocket knife along the edge of the lock. Minutes passed, long, slow, filled with the distant sounds of the living world far above. Finally, with a groan, the door swung inward. The light fell on the huddled figure inside. A woman, thin, bruised, arms wrapped tight around her knees, face streaked with tears and dust. Blonde hair tangled across her cheek, lips cracked. She lifted her head at the light, and her eyes, huge, frightened, searching, locked on Sam's. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. Alder crept forward, slow and gentle, and pressed his head to her outstretched hand. She flinched, then let her fingers curl, trembling, into the warmth of his fur. Sam stayed very still, letting the moment hold. All the pain, the fear, the days lost to darkness and waiting, held in the quiet between three breathing beings. As Sam leaned in, he caught a thread of her voice, almost lost. He said he'd come back for me, if I made a sound. A chill traced down Sam's spine. Was the man who did this still lurking in the dark above, or waiting in the night beyond? And would hope prove fragile or just enough? The silence in the cellar was thick, as if the world above had been sealed away with a heavy hand. Time slipped strange in places like this, untethered from clocks and calendars, measured only by the shallow pulse of breath and the way fear moved through air, sharp, metallic, filling the hollow behind the eyes. Sam crouched near the girl, June, careful not to crowd her. He let the beam of his flashlight fall soft across the floor, careful not to blind her, careful not to draw attention to either of them if any listening ear remained overhead. Alder lay between them, his body a shield, tail sweeping slow arcs along the dust. He pressed his side gently against June's leg, a silent gesture of presence that seemed to cut through the chill. The walls were close, stone-lined with the history of old winters and long-forgotten storms. Somewhere water dripped in a distant corner, counting out seconds neither of them could see. Sam watched June's shoulders, the way they trembled with each breath, the bluish smudges along her wrist where the rope had bitten deep, the quick dart of her eyes toward the stairs every few moments. She did not speak, her mouth pressed into a line that might once have known laughter. The only sound from her now was the thin, wheezing hush of survival. He set down the flashlight, letting it rest on the edge of a broken crate. The beam illuminated scraps of what had been: a torn packet of crackers, a crushed water bottle, a sodden sweatshirt draped across a crate. The world had shrunk for June to this: a few square feet of cold earth, a handful of things someone else had left behind, and the endless stretch of hours in the dark. Sam reached into his pocket, slow and deliberate, and offered her his own canteen. For a moment she hesitated, shoulders knotting, eyes darting from him to the dog. Then, with the awkward trust of someone who has had everything taken and is now being offered something small but true, she took the canteen and sipped. Water dripped down her chin. Alder pressed his head against her knee, and she set trembling fingers in his fur, anchoring herself to the world above. Sam kept his voice low, almost as if he were talking to the cellar itself, not the girl. "You're safe now. We're going to get you out." The words felt too large for the room, and too thin for the kind of pain that hung between them. Alder sniffed the floor, moving with careful purpose. His nose swept over a scattered trail, a small, ragged scrap of hair, blonde and fine, a spot of blood dried to rusty brown. Sam's gaze followed, and for a heartbeat he felt himself slipping sideways, memory dragging him back. A winter night years ago, a friend lost in a crawl space, the helplessness that grew in silence when no answer came. He gripped the edge of the crate, forcing himself back into the moment. June lifted her head. In the fragile light, Sam saw the outline of her jaw, the rawness in her eyes, a mix of hope, disbelief, and something like shame. She mouthed words before her voice emerged, hoarse and tiny, nearly swept away by the stone. Is he gone?" she whispered, voice breaking. "He said he'd come back if I made a sound." Sam shook his head, quiet but steady. "We'll make sure he doesn't come back. Not for you. Not for anyone." He watched her hands, saw how they curled in Alder's fur. He let the next moment stretch, let her breathe, let Alder's silent warmth say what words could not. The air in the cellar felt charged now, not just with fear, but with the sense that everything here was temporary. The dark, the cold, even the despair. Outside, dawn was still hours away, but there was a shift, a thinning of the night. Sam rose to his feet, scanning the corners. Alder sniffed at a pile of rope, nudged a crust of stale bread, then paused. The dog's ears flicked, body going tense, gaze locked on a shadow in the farthest part of the room. Sam followed, flashlight beam trembling as it landed on a single, fine strand of hair, gold against gray cement. Next to it, a partial print, shoe tread, larger than Sam's own, pressed deep into the earth, still damp at the edges. He bent low, fingers brushing the print, feeling the cold bite of fear again. This was no ghost's sign. Someone had been here recently. Someone who weighed more than a girl could. Someone who might be close. Alder let out a low, throaty whine, his body tense, as if hearing something Sam could not. June drew her knees tighter to her chest. The cellar pressed in on itself, the air thickening with old dust and unspoken dread. From above, a sound, faint, deliberate, not wind, but something heavier. A footstep, slow and measured, along the floorboards overhead. Sam turned off the flashlight, willing himself invisible, the darkness settling in. Alder's breath was slow, deliberate, one eye trained on the stairs. Sam drew June closer, a protective curve of his body shielding her as best he could. The footstep paused, then continued, lighter this time, as if whoever was there was listening for movement below. The silence felt endless, stretched thin until it threatened to snap. At last, the steps faded, replaced by the creak of an old hinge and the hush of the wind returning through the broken windows. Sam waited, counting out 100 heartbeats, before breathing again. Alder moved back to his side, silent but alert. June pressed her forehead to her knees, shoulders quaking in the aftershock. Above, the world remained unknowable, dangerous, or maybe already empty. Alder sniffed near the foot of the stairs and unearthed something small, an iron key, heavy, pitted by rust. Next to it, a folded scrap of paper, words scrawled in haste. End of the line, Mill Road. What was Mill Road? And did it lead to another hiding place? Or an escape for the man who haunted the cellar's shadows? It was the hour between midnight and morning, when the world seemed neither fully asleep nor truly awake, and every sound was magnified. A drip, a shuffle, the faintest stirring of breath. Down in the earth, beneath the ruined house, time warped into a slow ache. But within that ache, something else grew, delicate as the first bud pushing through frost. Hope, uncertain but alive. Sam steadied June with a gentle hand. Her face, ashen under streaks of grime, bore the shape of a question. Would this really end, or would fear reach down and close its grip again? He helped her to sit upright, supporting her trembling shoulders. Alder stayed close, his great head nudging June's arm, inviting her to lean on him, to trust the warmth he offered. Sam's movements were deliberate. He took out his small pocket knife, hands steady despite the pulse in his throat, and began to work at the knots binding June's wrists. The rope was frayed, crusted with blood. Each tug made her flinch, but she didn't pull away. He glanced at her, her jaw clenched, eyes squeezed shut, and remembered the old stories his mother told, of how some wounds could only be borne in silence, witnessed but never named. The rope loosened. June drew her hands to her chest, rubbing her wrists with stiff fingers, the gesture almost childlike. Alder licked the raw skin gently, as if his tongue might erase what had been done. June startled at the touch, then let out a thin, uncertain laugh, half cry, half relief. The sound rose and faded in the cellar, then was swallowed by the earth. Sam handed her a bottle of water, held it as she drank, letting her sip slowly. He watched for signs of collapse, a faint, a fall, but June was made of something tougher than she looked. When she handed back the bottle, her hands were steadier. She met Sam's gaze, and for the first time, he saw something besides terror. A flicker of resolve, raw but present. "Can you stand?" he asked, voice little more than a whisper, conscious of every sound above. She nodded, lips white, then braced herself on his arm. Sam rose, feeling the weight of her frail body as she found her feet, legs wobbling but unwilling to give in. Alder kept close, tail gently swaying, brushing her calf, a silent encouragement. There was a tension in the air, sharp as a wire drawn tight. Every so often, June's head jerked up at a creak from above. A floorboard, maybe the wind, maybe something more. Sam tried to still his own breathing, heart ticking loud in his ears. He reached out, touching the small iron key Alder had found, its weight cold and certain in his pocket. The scrap of paper with end of the line Mill Road scrawled on it burned a hole in his mind. What waited on that road, and for whom? He knew their time was short. Whoever had kept June here might return. He might be watching already, hidden in the blur of shadow above, waiting for a mistake. Sam checked his sidearm, thumbed the radio clipped to his belt, but left it silent. Some calls, he knew, could not wait for backup. Some rescues required the hush of footsteps, the patience of a man who'd been alone in darkness before. As June leaned heavily on his arm, Sam was swept by a memory. His brother, years ago, after a factory accident, refusing a wheelchair, stubbornly walking across a hospital corridor, refusing to surrender even an inch to pain. The same silent defiance lived now in June, a trembling woman who would not be broken, not if she could help it. Above them, the wind moaned through the broken house. In that moment, a new sound threaded through the silence, a distant, unnatural sputter, the low, pulsing growl of a motorbike engine, muffled by trees but drawing nearer. Sam's entire body tensed. He shot a look at June, who shrank back, eyes wide with old dread. Alder let out a rumbling warning, body rigid, nose lifted toward the faint tremor in the floorboards. Sam guided June into a corner behind an old oil drum, crouching low, pulling Alder beside them. The three huddled close, man, woman, dog, bound by a fear that had grown too real to name. June pressed her lips to Sam's ear, voice shivering but fierce. "Gale. He said if I screamed he'd find me. He never leaves long." Her hand clenched Alder's ruff, holding tight as the engine's sound ebbed and swelled, then died somewhere outside. Sam felt her fear, old, suffocating, raw, but beneath it, the smallest ember of hope. She was not alone now. They waited, the three of them, as footsteps crunched in the yard above. The world shrank to a single patch of dirt and the hush of shared breath. Alder shifted, watching Sam, seeking a signal, a moment to act, to defend, to trust. From behind the oil drum, June gripped Sam's sleeve. "He keeps talking about Mill Road. He's not finished. There's someone else. He said, the other girl." The words shuddered into the dark. Who was Gale, really? What was his plan for Mill Road? And did hope for one mean danger for another, still waiting in the dark? Above the cellar, the world had begun its slow shift toward dawn, though the darkness still pressed heavy against the windows and walls of the ruined house. Inside, the weight of night hung as thick as the musty air. Sam held himself perfectly still in the shadows beside June and Alder, every muscle alert, breath measured, heart thumping in a way that seemed to echo through the earth itself. The motorbike had gone quiet, swallowed by the silence that always followed trouble. For a while, nothing. Just the faint moan of the wind, the drip of water down a stone wall. June's small breaths hiccuping in her chest. Alder's tail was stone still, ears pitched forward, nose twitching with every current in the air. Then, the unmistakable creak of the front porch, slow and testing, as if whoever approached was not entirely certain he was alone. A hush, then the scrape of boots over warped floorboards. Each step above them was drawn out and deliberate, heavy as regret. In the gloom, June's hand found Sam's coat. He felt her nails press through the fabric, seeking some anchor in a world that had become too dangerous, too uncertain. Sam moved in front of her by instinct, blocking her from the thin light that slipped through a crack in the cellar door. Alder, perfectly silent, slunk to the base of the stairs, pressing his flank low to the ground. His body seemed to dissolve into shadow, all muscle and old loyalty, the promise of protection honed by years of shared solitude. A floorboard groaned, then another. A beam of light, narrow, harsh, like a finger probing the dark, flashed across the far wall, then tracked along the edge of the basement door. The footsteps paused. Sam heard the click of a switchblade or a pistol, the small, metallic certainty of violence. He forced his own breath to slow, hand hovering over his holstered weapon. He did not reach for it. Sometimes, waiting was the only shield a man could carry. For an endless moment, the house was nothing but nerves stretched thin as wire. Then, a sudden bang. The basement door yanked open, spilling a slice of gray light down the crumbling stairs. In its frame, the silhouette of a man, tall, hunched in a battered jacket, face lost to shadow, a flashlight in one hand, something heavier in the other. Sam didn't move. Alder stayed low, not a sound leaving his lips, but every muscle was bunched tight. The man's light danced over the debris, missing Sam and June by inches. A muttered curse, then a slow step down the stairs. 1, 2. Each footfall pressed dust from the old wood, carrying the smell of gasoline and sweat. Then the man paused halfway down, his head tilted, listening. Silence except for the drip of water, the ghost of breath. Sam watched as the intruder scanned the room, suspicion written in the set of his shoulders, the angle of his chin. For one breathless instant, the light swept over Alder's back. The shepherd froze, eyes fixed and unblinking. Sam felt his own heart stop, willing the dog into perfect stillness. Suddenly, the man turned, doubt or fear, or instinct sending him back up the stairs. He slammed the door, cursing low, the sound rattling the old hinges. Footsteps hurried now, retreating across the boards, out through the front hall. Another creak, a door thrown open, the sound of boots pounding away through the wet grass. Sam let out a breath he didn't know he'd held. In the silence that followed, he touched June's shoulder, grounding her in the here and now. Alder trotted to the base of the stairs, sniffing, then digging at the loose earth and dust with single-minded focus. Sam turned his flashlight back on, heart still wild, shining it where Alder indicated. There, under the bottom step, almost invisible in the darkness, a small iron key, smeared with mud, looped on a leather cord. Next to it, a folded scrap of lined paper. Sam plucked the paper open, holding it to the trembling beam, scrawled across the crumpled sheet in a hand grown frantic. End of the line, Mill Road. Sam's mind leapt to the warning June had whispered. The other girl, the possibility of another victim, another story teetering at the edge of loss. He closed his fist over the key, letting its weight settle into his palm, the shape of a promise, the price of a vow not to leave anyone behind. June had crumpled in on herself, spent by fear, but her eyes lifted to Sam's, wild with questions she could not yet ask. Outside, the world was stirring, the far-off caw of a crow, the first hint of purple bleeding into the eastern sky. Sam pulled June to her feet, Alder pressing close to steady them both. In the hush, Sam felt the night's fear transform into something else. Resolve, thick and bitter as coffee left on the burner too long. The darkness had not won, not tonight. As Sam tucked the key and the note into his jacket, he caught the distant whine of an engine, fading, not approaching. Whoever had come was leaving, but to where? Sam's gaze fell on June, then Alder, and the answer burned in his mind. Mill Road was waiting, and whatever had begun in the cellar was far from over. Would they reach Mill Road in time, or was the true end of the line waiting for another innocent, hidden in the morning fog? Dawn crept slowly across the fields, diluting the last threads of night with a pale, silver promise. Outside, the grass lay heavy with dew, each blade shining like the memory of some gentle world lost and not yet found. From the broken house, Sam guided June up the cellar steps, one hand steady on her elbow, Alder circling back and forth, alert to every sound. The old door yielded to the morning with a sigh, spilling them out into the trembling hush between darkness and day. June's steps were uneven, a dancer learning to walk again. Her bare feet left ghostly impressions on the mud and frost-bitten grass. Sam offered his jacket, draping it across her narrow shoulders. She shivered, not from cold alone, but from the chill that lingers after survival, the ache that burrows deep and resists every touch of light. Her face was turned toward the horizon, where the sun would rise, eyes swollen but clear, lips pressed in a thin line that was not defeat, but something like defiance. Alder led the way, nose to the ground, his gait sure but never hurried. Now and then he stopped, ears flicking, reading the invisible news carried on the wind, the sharpness of tire tracks, the scent of old gasoline, the echo of fear pressed into earth and wood. He doubled back, brushing his body against June's knee, reminding her with every nudge, "You are not alone." Sam felt the stiffness in his own limbs, the exhaustion coiling up his spine, but he forced himself to remain steady. He moved with the calm of a man who had survived many storms and knew that the worst damage often showed itself only after the clouds had cleared. There was no need for words. The morning was full of them already, soft, searching, heavy with what had been endured. As they crossed the yard, Sam caught the faint blue pulse of police lights flickering against the tree line, a distant signal, winding its way up the rutted lane from the edge of town. He raised a hand, watching the headlights shudder and bob along the gravel. In the quiet, he could hear the crackle of radios, the hurried voices of men who had not yet learned to walk softly in the presence of suffering. A squad car slid to a halt in the grass, doors flying open. Uniformed officers spilled out, voices clipped and urgent, hands fluttering over holsters and radios. Sam kept June tucked behind him, not shielding her so much as anchoring her, a gesture as old as parenthood, as familiar as faith. One of the younger deputies, cheeks red from the cold, knelt beside June and murmured a question Sam did not hear. June only nodded, her lips barely moving. Alder pressed against her thigh, holding her steady when the world threatened to tilt. The paramedics arrived next, wheeling a stretcher across the uneven yard. June hesitated, gaze flitting from the white sheets to the worn wooden porch behind them. Sam squeezed her hand, and with that, she surrendered to the care of strangers, folding herself into the blanket, eyes half shut, Alder's nose pressed to her palm until the last moment. It was Alder, not the men with badges, who drew a broken smile from her, a silent promise that not everything had been lost. While the EMTs checked June's vitals, Sam stepped away, turning his face to the wind. He saw his own hands, crusted with old blood, shaking now that there was nothing left to hold. He let the wind scour his skin, let the first light of morning lay its blessing on his battered frame. The ground beneath his boots was soft with thaw, ready to take whatever weight he could no longer carry. A detective in a dark parka joined him, asking questions about what had happened inside the house. Sam answered in fragments, enough to give direction, never enough to capture the story's cost. He handed over the key and the scrap of paper. End of the line, Mill Road. The detective's brow furrowed, voice dropping, eyes darting to the other officers as they fanned out, securing the scene, marking tire tracks, searching for the invisible thread that might lead them to the next lost child. Behind him, the paramedics loaded June into the ambulance. Alder jumped in behind her without being told, his weight shaking the old shocks. June's hand found his fur and held tight, the two of them retreating together into the quiet hush of cotton and antiseptic. Sam leaned against the squad car, feeling his body give in to gravity. He closed his eyes, listening, not for danger now, but for the absence of it. He could hear June's voice, low and uncertain, asking the medic for a pen. There's another girl," she whispered. "He's got her on Mill Road. Please don't leave her behind." Her words carried through the open door and settled heavy on the air. Alder glanced back at Sam, eyes dark with understanding. The dog's posture said what Sam could not. There is always more to be done. Another soul waiting in the dark for rescue. Another morning not yet promised. The detective pressed a muddy collar into Sam's hand, found in the grass by Mill Road. Tiny letters on the tag spelling a girl's name no one recognized. Would they find her in time? Or would Mill Road become another place for sorrow to take root, just beyond the reach of the dawn? The ambulance door thudded shut, with a weight that seemed to close not just the morning's crisis, but a chapter of unmeasured pain. Sam watched as the vehicle rolled down the gravel drive, taillights swallowed by the bending pines, June's pale face framed in a window, her hand still pressed in Alder's thick ruff, a gesture as fragile as hope itself. Back in the yard, the wind picked up, stirring the brittle weeds and scattering old leaves along the ditch. The world felt hushed, drawn in tight, as if holding its breath for whatever might come next. Sam stood alone beside the squad car, hands still gritty with old blood, jacket stained and heavy with the chill that lingers after fear. The blue and red strobes lit the house in silent intervals, painting everything in a color that had nothing to do with peace. Alder returned sooner than Sam expected, bounding from the ambulance as soon as the paramedic's back was turned, paws pressing shallow prints in the soft mud. He sat beside Sam, leaning just enough for their shoulders to meet. Sam looked down, met the shepherd's eyes, and found something old and steady there, a patience that had survived storms far more vicious than this dawn. The detective brought news in low tones, voice ragged at the edges from too many cases that ended with silence and sorrow. The collar found by Mill Road was real, faded pink, the tag a little heart engraved with Sarah, an address from a town miles north. A few brown hairs still clung to the inside of the band, as if waiting for a hand that would not return. Sam's heart snagged on the detail. He let the detective's words wash over him, their meaning more shape than sound. The world felt layered in loss, but somewhere beneath, something new was trying to break through. He thought about June, her wide, searching eyes, the lines of dirt beneath her nails, the way she had pressed her forehead to Alder's and wept without shame. Trauma has a way of carving secret maps in the heart. He recognized it because he carried the same lines himself. Scars not written on the skin, but carried in the hush between breaths, in the way one's hand sometimes shook reaching for the coffee, in the way the past never quite loosened its hold. Alder nudged his knee, a grounding gesture. Sam remembered a winter years ago, walking home from his brother's funeral, his hand numb inside a glove, the world a watercolor of loss and frozen tears. That day, it was a neighbor's old dog, nameless and gray, who pressed against his thigh, who stood sentinel on the porch until the house lights came on and the night passed without words. Dogs knew things that people forgot: how to wait, how to forgive, how to be present in the storm. The morning grew brighter, sunlight beginning to cut through the trees. Around him, deputies worked in quiet formation, marking evidence, tracing the tire tracks out toward Mill Road. Paramedics packed away their kits, their faces soft with relief at a life returned, tense with the knowledge that others might still be waiting. June would recover, they said. Bruised ribs, dehydration, old rope burns. But when the nurse called from the emergency room, her voice was gentler than any report. "She's asking for your dog," she said. "Says she doesn't want to be alone." Sam felt something in his chest loosen. He knew what it meant to need a companion in the aftermath. The silence between tragedy and healing could be a chasm if crossed alone. Alder rode with Sam to the hospital, windows down, the crisp scent of pine rushing in, the town just beginning to wake. At the ER, nurses smiled, waving the old shepherd inside, ignoring rules for the sake of what the girl needed most. Alder slipped into June's room, paws soft on tile, body moving with the careful gravity of the old and wise. June sat up, hair brushed but eyes rimmed red, a paper cup of water trembling in her hands. When she saw Alder, her whole face changed. Some dam broke, and for a moment, the pain fell away. She reached for him, and he climbed onto the bed without hesitation, pressing his head to her lap. June closed her eyes, mouth curved in the beginning of a smile. "You're real," she whispered. Sam stood in the doorway, letting the moment hold. The light through the window cut soft patterns over the hospital sheets. Alder's tail thumped quietly, June's hand buried in his fur. No one spoke. There was nothing to say that mattered more than this simple, wordless reunion, the healing touch of one survivor to another. Later, when Sam stepped out into the hallway, the detective was waiting with a folder. Inside, photos from Mill Road. Among the brush, they had found more than tire tracks. Another set of footprints, smaller, half erased, a torn ribbon with dried blood, a child's drawing folded tight and stained with mud. Each piece was a story unfinished. A collar, a ribbon, a drawing. Proof of another life waiting on Mill Road. And Alder, upon sniffing the collar, pricked his ears, body suddenly alert, recognizing the scent, a signal only Sam could read. Would the traces lead to hope, or to another heartbreak hiding just beyond the edge of healing? Night receded slowly from Ishpeming. the sky blushing pink behind the black lace of pines. In the quiet house, Sam sat on the edge of his bed, boots on the floor, gaze caught between sleep and memory. The morning light crept over old photographs on the dresser, a scattering of ribbons, the battered badge he'd polished each day for years. The air still carried a chill, but spring was breaking through. He could hear the steady drip of snowmelt along the gutters, the promise of green hiding under the brown. Alder lay curled at the foot of the bed, nose tucked beneath his tail, but his eyes remained open, keeping watch even in rest. Some nights, after a rescue, Alder would pace for hours, restless with the scent of old pain. But this morning he was quiet, present, anchored in the hush that only follows a night when hope has survived. Sam rose and crossed to the window. Outside, the fields lay wide and silvered with dew, the dark stripe of Mill Road curling away beyond the maples. For a moment, he let himself watch the crows lifting from the fence posts, their shadows slipping over the frost. In the heart of this stillness, something settled inside him, a knowledge that what mattered most was not the noise of the world, but the moments that passed unremarked. A soft breath, a dog's warm flank, the space two lonely souls might share without a word. He dressed slowly, pulling on his old uniform, creased, patched, the name Wilder faint but proud over his heart. In the kitchen, he poured himself coffee, hands steady now that dawn had brought a measure of peace. Alder's nails clicked on the linoleum. The dog leaned his head against Sam's knee, and Sam scratched behind his ears, grateful for the familiar weight. Neither of them hurried as they left the house, stepping into a day half-formed, the fields open and wide. The morning was gentle, a low mist veiling the path. Together, man and dog crossed the empty lot, boots and paws leaving twin trails in the damp grass. Mill Road waited beyond the tree line, its gravel soft with thaw. Tire ruts pooled with last night's rain. Sam paused where the ditch widened, Alder circling, nose low to the ground. The scent was there, faint but certain, a blend of wild earth, fear, and the memory of another dog. Alder's tail stiffened. He moved ahead, then stopped, looking back with a question in his eyes. Sam followed. They walked in silence. Sam thought of June, safe now but changed. The rawness in her voice when she'd thanked him for staying, for bringing Alder. He thought of his own brother's grave, the empty seat at family gatherings, the way some absences never closed. And he thought, too, of every person who'd been found, sometimes only in memory, sometimes alive, always altered by the journey through darkness. At the edge of the field, where Mill Road bent toward the woods, Alder stopped. He sniffed along a clump of wet grass, then began to dig, slow and deliberate, as if reading some buried language only dogs could know. The earth gave way beneath his paws. Sam crouched beside him, heart tight, each breath drawn out and careful. The moment held, a pocket of quiet within a world too often ruled by noise. Sunlight slipped through the clouds, dappling the grass, warming the back of Sam's hand as he brushed away the last clump of dirt. There, in the hollow Alder had made, something shimmered, a length of faded ribbon, tangled around a small, battered locket. Inside, pressed flat, a photograph of a girl, cheeks smudged, smiling wide into the camera. The locket still held warmth, as if someone had only recently let it go. Alder's tail beat once, slow and sure. He nosed the ribbon, then looked at Sam, eyes bright with expectation. Hope, or memory, or maybe just the desire to keep moving forward. Sam stood, turning the locket over in his palm. He let the wind pass over his face, let the morning settle on his shoulders. In that moment, he felt the distance between grief and grace close, just a little. Behind them, the world continued, traffic waking on the highway, someone's radio playing an old song, the slow, daily movement of lives that might never know how close darkness had come. But in the field, with Alder at his side, Sam understood that happiness wasn't a grand thing, but a series of small, persistent choices: to return, to search, to hope, to stay. He glanced down at Alder, then out over the wet grass, the fields stretching on and on. Alder began to bark, sharp and insistent, paws churning at the base of a thicket. From within, a faint cry, a human sound, desperate, alive, rose up. The grass trembled as Alder dug deeper, Sam already moving to join him, heart thundering with hope and fear in equal measure. Would the life hidden in the fields be saved in time? Or would another scar be added, silent and deep, to the land that had already seen so much sorrow? The dawn was well and truly broken now. The pale blue of morning stretched wide across the fields. Every blade of grass sparkled with the remnants of night, each drop of dew catching the new light like a small, silent celebration. Sam knelt in the thicket, mud soaking through the knees of his old uniform, Alder digging with tireless purpose at his side. From within the tangled brush, a sound, soft, ragged, unmistakable, the muffled cry of a child. Alder's digging redoubled, his whole body shaking with the force of hope. Sam pushed aside branches, hands raw from bramble thorns, until at last he caught a glimpse of a pale, dirt-smudged face, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. A little girl, no more than 9 or 10, huddled in a hollow beneath the roots of a fallen tree. Her cheeks were streaked with mud and tears, her hair tangled with bits of last year's grass. She clung to a filthy blanket, clutching it so tightly her knuckles showed white. For a moment, she simply stared, too exhausted to weep, too stunned to run. Alder went to her first, crawling low, his tail a slow, reassuring wag. He pressed his nose gently into her small hand, waited for her to touch him. She did, tentatively, and then with desperate need, arms flinging around the dog's neck, face buried in his fur. A long, shuddering sob escaped her, the sound rising like a prayer into the open sky. Sam crouched beside them, voice gentle, steady as dawn. "You're safe now. We've got you." He lifted her carefully into his arms. The girl was light as a sigh, her heartbeat fluttering against his chest, her tears wetting the collar of his shirt. Alder pressed close, pacing alongside as Sam carried her from the thicket out into the new morning. Across the field, rescue workers and townsfolk gathered, drawn by Alder's barking and the girl's faint cries. There was no cheering, no eruption of applause, just a hush, deep and reverent, as if the whole town had been holding its breath and could now exhale. June, bandaged but upright, waited by the edge of the crowd, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her eyes shining with tears. She stepped forward as Sam passed, reached out to squeeze the girl's hand, and offered her a small, sad smile, the kind that only survivors can give to one another. Alder remained at the girl's side, a living shield, accepting every pat, every grateful tear, with the patience of the old and the wise. He was still for a long time, then finally sat, head lifted to the sky as if to say, "This is how we keep going." The crowd shifted, people coming together in twos and threes, some with coffee, some with trembling hands, some with quiet prayers. Old arguments and small-town resentments faded in that moment. What mattered was only this: the return of a child to the living, the proof that darkness could be breached, that no one was truly alone. Sam felt the ache of relief and exhaustion settle into his bones, but he let it in, did not turn away. He knew, as Alder did, that some wounds do not vanish. Healing is not the same as forgetting. But each act of kindness, a hand on a shoulder, a dog's patient vigil, the simple courage to keep searching, became a stitch in a larger, stronger fabric. He stood back as paramedics took the girl, wrapping her in blankets, voices soft as lullabies. Sam watched as June knelt beside Alder, brushing mud from his coat, pressing her forehead to his. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Alder's tail thumped gently in answer. As the morning wore on, townspeople gathered outside the little church, some bringing food, others blankets or spare coats. There were no speeches, no headlines, only gratitude folded into the shape of community. Sam sat on the steps with Alder at his feet, June beside them, hands curled around a mug of tea. The quiet was deep, the kind that comes when people realize they have come through the darkness together. Later, when the field was empty and the world had shifted back to the slow business of daily life, Sam found a letter tucked under his windshield wiper. The handwriting was careful, looping, young. Inside was a drawing: Alder, June, and the little girl, standing in the wild field beneath a wide sunlit sky. On the back, a single line: "There's always hope if you're willing to follow it home." Sam looked at Alder, at the town beyond, at the faint outline of Mill Road winding toward the woods. He felt the ache and the balm of it, the way sorrow and hope can dwell side by side in the same heart. He knew then that happiness was not a thunderclap or a miracle, but the slow, persistent work of kindness, one quiet act at a time. Sometimes it was a hand reaching down, or a dog's gentle nudge, or the simple, stubborn refusal to stop searching. As dusk settled and the fields glowed gold and soft, Sam sat with Alder beneath the open sky, letting the silence speak. He thought of all the ways we come home, not in victory, but in the grace of being found, of being held, of holding on. In every town, every life, someone waits in darkness for a small miracle. How many times have we, too, walked the long field, hoping for a sign, not knowing that hope itself is already walking beside us? Sometimes the miracles we need don't arrive with sirens or bright lights. They come quietly, on the patient pause of an old dog, or in the steady hand of someone who refuses to give up. Healing isn't about erasing scars, but learning to carry them with compassion, and to reach out when someone is lost in the dark. In the end, it's the smallest acts, a gentle touch, a loyal companion, a single voice calling out hope, that remind us we're never truly alone. If this story touched you, or if you've ever found light in a dark place thanks to a friend, human or animal, share your experience in the comments. Where did you find hope when you needed it most? And if you believe there's always a way home for those who keep searching, type Amen or leave a few words of encouragement for others reading tonight. May we all carry a little more kindness into the world, one quiet miracle at a time.